Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We're starting our weekend with watches, and everything you see is for sale. Names, references, and when available, prices in the description below. To buy, trade, or sell, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. And remember, we are in a buying mode. Whether a single watch or an entire collection, we are paying the highest prices since our founding in 2017. Again, if you wish to sell, reach out to tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Now let's talk about a landmark watch. The 20th anniversary Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph, the 26331OR, features the 2017 and forward dial and case construction. This is an extraordinary 41mm red gold example with the much sought blue Grande Tapisserie dial. As you can see, it features the classic rounded octagonal bezel designed after a diving helmet. You can see the dial is also the tapisserie, not the petite that you find on the jumbo. Slightly larger, but still cut on a pantograph, unlike the stamped steel piece that you'll find on the offshore. Now the watch has the same style of hexagonal flanked shouldered chronograph pushers as the previous model, but here they are not actually screw downs. You don't need to screw down, in or out, to operate or lock the chronograph. Now the watch still has 50-meter water resistance and it's fully loomed and automatic, so this is a full-service sports watch. 41mm and powered by a Frédéric Piguet 1185 vertical clutch column wheel integrated automatic chronograph caliber. The timepiece is broad, substantial, and in red gold with blue dial particularly intense. Note the contrast of those metallic rose gold centers with a sort of contrasting matte and semi-gloss metallic finish that creates an animated light dance across the dials and the sub-registers in particular. Now, of course, the watch is reasonably thin, and it's broad like an offshore, but it's thin, and that is really where it differs from the 42mm chronograph. Also, with the full integrated bracelet, as Genta intended, you can see where the money went, as hand finishing of this bracelet, case, and bezel collectively takes over 12 hours, and all the effort is manually executed. You can see some of the polish in between the little intermediate links inside the bracelet. You can only really see that polish as you roll the links through the light, and there's a perfectly aligned bevel along the edge. The tolerances, the step down of the tapered bracelet, so tight that you can see the swoop, you can see the curve, but you can actually feel the steps between links. Not a whole lot to see on the reverse side of the watch, but this timepiece is all about the case, bracelet, and dial. Now shifting to something with a similarly blue dial, but a very different vibe and functionality. This is a model launched in 2017 that pretty much perfected the 2012 Rolex Oyster Perpetual Sky Dweller, a GMT and an annual calendar. This model, 42mm, is principally Rolex 904L steel with the exception of the white gold bezel. Now being a 42, it is larger than your standard Rolex, but it doesn't have the super case that you see on some of the hardcore sports watches. In fact, it's more like a large Datejust in form. It's only 13.8mm thick, which is probably going to take some by surprise, as you'd expect it to be thicker given what's inside the case. Now, of course, the watch 3-day power reserve, chronometer certified, 100 meters water resistant, but the fun of the Sky Dweller is in playing with the complications and the ring command bezel. Now, you can see when I pull the crown out all the way, nothing happens. I can wind in the first position, but what I have to do is turn the bezel one click counterclockwise. Now you'll see that I can drive the annual calendar forward or backwards, and note that the month indicator, which pairs a month to each hour of the day, so I'm looking at June, now I'm looking at May, and you may wonder why is it that I am jumping bidirectionally, because this is a bidirectional annual calendar. One of the brilliant aspects of this watch is that there are only 9 pieces involved in the annual calendar system. Virtually foolproof and indestructible. It's a Rolex through and through. You have a 24-hour time zone at center that allows you to read in 24-hour format a second independent time. Let's do a loom shot here. Unlike the early Sky Dwellers, this dial is fully loomed, so you have the hands, yes, but you also have the indices. Mostly steel, blue dial, this is the one to own. That said, I'm partial to this model because I was there at its birth at Basel World 2016, or as many now recall, the last real Basel World before the downsizing and ultimately the phase-out. This, of course, is the 116622 Rolex Oyster Perpetual Yacht-Master. Mostly stainless steel, this watch too features a precious metal bezel, bi-directional timing, albeit in platinum, not white gold, and the full bezel, not just the insert, is platinum. What set this model apart from the previous blue dial steel platinum was the use of dark rhodium on the dial, which has an extraordinary metallic sunburst nickel anthracite aesthetic with beautiful flashes of cyan blue and of course white gold hands and white gold indices. This is a watch that has a graceful case. We talked about the Datejust style case on the Sky Dweller. This case feels more like a Daytona. It even has the flatted underside profile to the lugs that you see on the Daytona. Nothing sheer, nothing squared off. This watch has a grace that is uncommon on modern Rolex sports watches like the GMT Sub and Sea Dwellers. 100 meters water resistant, chronometer certified. Of course, this is a bi-directional bezel because it's used to count down to the start of a match or a contest within a sailing regatta. Nevertheless, this is a wonderful surf and turf Rolex sports watch, as it's equally at home on the high seas or in the yacht club, ballroom, or dining room after. I'll throw it on the wrist real quick. It's a fairly thin watch. Now you can see it has the more hardcore Rolex Oyster clasp with both the clamshell and the lift lock, so this one stays resolutely shut on the wrist. Nice, flat, flush, handsome. And it would be a beautiful grayscale if it weren't for the blue, but the blue is what really makes the watch for me. That small, well-chosen splash of color. It's like the red on the previous platinum steel, platinum dial model. Awesome look, an unusual use of dark rhodium. That said, this right here has to be my favorite Rolex I've encountered in a long time. Made in 1975, this is the Rolex Chilini, reference 4015. Now the watch is about 29.3 millimeters lug to lug by about 28.6 millimeters side to side, and you will note, like the original King Midas, it is a lefty crown with an asymmetrical case profile. Unlike the original 1964 King Midas, it features this extravagant 1970s gadroon style bezel and case, and you'll note this watch pairs the bezel and the case into a single unit, so there's no break. It's a seamless aesthetic until you turn it over. It has a removable case back, and you can see just how well preserved this watch is, as the Rolex crown, the serial number, even the hallmarking on the case back is still deep and distinct. You could see that the edges are also quite sharp, and though the watch shows evidence of having been worn, it's not a total time capsule, it also shows evidence of having all of its original white gold present, which means it hasn't been worn down on the refinisher's wheel. The dial is an explosive and beautifully preserved undeclared predecessor to the Journe Chronometre Bleu. I never would have imagined that Rolex arrived at this solution and this effect decades before Journe himself, but that's exactly what happened. This dial is explosive, lustrous, glossy, and underneath an early application of a sapphire on a Rolex watch. The watch is only 7 millimeters thick with a manual wind, caliber 1601, 19.8 beat rate, 19 joules, 48-hour power reserve, allowing this watch to be truly slim. On the wrist, it is incredibly comfortable, gorgeous, elegant, and unusual. You will not encounter another Rolex owner who has one of these. The timepiece is absolutely special. It's different. It's anything but another vintage GMT Sub, Sea Dweller, or Daytona. And because it's an early example of a Rolex Chilini, it's also interesting because you can examine and analyze the origin of the species. The Rolex dress watch, at its best, the company hit an all-time peak for dress watch elegance right out of the gate with this model 4015. What's this? Are you seeing double? Nope. This is the Sinn EZM3, launched in 2015. If it looks like my EZM11, that is the idea. A watch that takes all the essential aesthetic elements of the original EZM1 and the later EZM11 and combines them in a 41mm bidirectional rotating bezel tribute to Sinn style and Sinn proprietary technologies. As you can see, it has that same media blasted case with the strong faceted lugs that are rightly associated historically with the EZM1 and 11. You can also see the use of the AR dehumidifying system. Initially, argon was injected back in the 90s with the EZM1. Today, though it does say AR, it's a nitrogen fill, and a copper sulfate capsule is inserted into the flank of the case to withdraw any additional moisture that may intrude over time. Now, the watch has a bidirectional rotating bezel. Let's hear the detent. It's quite sharp, it's quite brightly loomed, it has an aluminum insert, and as you can see, I've been wearing mine, and I must say I've been wearing mine without mercy for 3 years. There are no marks on that thickly anodized bezel insert. So here's an example of ceramic maybe being overkill. You don't need it here. The dial is all matte black with high contrast key lime colored superluminova, the brightest kind. Inside, ETA 2824 regulated by Sinn in top grade. Very accurate, very tough. As you can see, 200 meters water resistant. The timepiece is gloriously Sinn, and on my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference, you can see it wears that way. Let's do a loom shot because this is a watch that was made for it. And we're back with the EZM3. I mentioned that the bezel is brightly loomed. You can see that the seconds hand is also brightly loomed. Now we'll go back to the day, or I should say the light, and you can see how the bezel works. It is a countdown bezel. This is the EZM MSE3F. That means mission timer, and you time your mission using that bezel. But if you want to up the ante, go for the model 206, 43 millimeters in stainless steel. This is a diving chronograph. Here properly, we have a diving bezel with a similarly chunky detent. Let's have another listen. And you can line up that bezel with the brightly loomed minute hand, and now you have a 0 to 60 minute count up timer. It works differently than the Yachtmaster. You could see that it too is constructed in a different fashion, as this watch uses Sinn's captive bezel technology, whereby screws are used to fix the bezel to the case, so it can't accidentally snap off like a Rolex or Omega bezel can. You could see SUG, that is the case maker owned by Sinn. They make their own cases. SUG, fun fact, also makes some of the precious metal Lange cases. You have the D3 sleeved chronograph pushers, essentially just making them more robust and water resistant. And the watch, as you can see, water resistant to 300 meters, is a true diving chronograph. You have a 7750 on the reverse side, but Sinn ships this in top grade, which is one down from chronometer, but it's adjusted to basically keep chronometer grade time at Sinn. So you're getting a tremendous amount of value. You're getting a chronograph, yes, but you're also getting a day and a date with a double quick set. As with the EZM3, it features the AR system, so it's filled with nitrogen, and it has the copper sulfate insert to dehumidify. This can be replaced during service at Sinn. It also has the distinctive EZM1 style lugs, which in addition to being strong, faceted, squared off and geometric, have lovely bevels molded in. A truly glorious watch, and a surprisingly wearable 43 millimeters. You can see this diving chrono does fit well on my wrist. It's a bold look to be sure, but a better buy and technically equivalent to most Hublot Big Bangs. It also gives you the extra bang for the buck of being a true Sinn instrument style watch with a bit more integrity than some of the pure fashion high-end brands. This watch trades on capability and a name that only a few connoisseurs know and appreciate. Which may as well describe Arnold Son of La Chaux de Fonds. Now this watch was launched in 2014. It's the CTB. It's the Chronograph True Beat, 44 millimeters in red gold. You can see the unusual feature here is that there is a double center coaxial handset. The one that is moving in deadbeat fashion is for your time telling functions. The one that is scrolling 8 beats per second, that is for your chronograph functions. So you have coaxial center seconds for both chrono and for time. Now note there are several different and handsome finishes on this dial, which has wonderful depth thanks to the Rayhaut outboard. You have metallic brushing, you have a frosted primary, and then you can see there's a matte or opaline for the sub-registers themselves. Also note the use of a 60-minute register for the chronograph, a feature I appreciate, as in general I only measure seconds and minutes with chronographs, and it's inconvenient to have only 30 minutes on the register. By giving you 60, Arnold Son goes above and beyond and makes their chronograph more practical. Now the caliber here is 7103, has a 45-hour automatic winding power reserve. As you can see, it features a blued column wheel for crisp action, and though you can't see it, it also features a vertical clutch for smooth actuation. The movement is handsomely finished, and you can see just how broad the bevels are. They are a mile wide, true mirrored, hand-rounded. This is high horology finish, doing a few things differently with the blued column wheel, the use of enormous rather than small blued screws, the use of Côte de Soleil instead of Côte de Genève. You can see they radiate out from the center of the winding bridge. And then again, the size of these bevels so broad that you don't even need a loop to appreciate. These are bevels like Philippe Dufour does bevels, a mile wide and bright as the sun. A glorious piece and surprisingly easy to wear for a 44mm. You can see the trick with Arnold Son is the shape of the lugs. They're short and tightly downturned, so though it's a 44, it wears more like a 42. Impressive wrist presence, but it's not a big bully. Technically and aesthetically outstanding. This is a watch from a brand that is a true manufacturer, backed by citizen watch money, so they'll always be around to service your watch, and way under the radar again. This is a connoisseur's piece. The Arnold Son CTB. This too could be described as a connoisseur's piece from a brand that feels like an independent, builds in low volume, but has Swatch Group money to protect it in the long term. This is the Blump Les Brasso split-second chronograph, 42mm in ultra-white platinum. You can see that it's part of a limited series of 100 pieces. Starting with the reverse side, we may as well discuss the caliber 40 F6. As you can see, beautifully hand executed, starting with a freehand engraved and skeletonized winding rotor. Now as we turn it around, you can see here too, the bevels are quite impressive. This is all based on a Frederic Piguet 1185 architecture, but it features not one but two column wheels. The second is hiding just under the rotor because of the split second architecture. Now as you start and stop the watch, you use the primary column wheel, but as you start and stop the split second function, which is coaxial with the crown, you use the second column wheel. Now you can see there's a power reserve indicator for the 40-hour power reserve. There's a date with a quick set. You can see white gold applique Roman numerals, including a watchmaker's 4 and white gold hands as well. The watch is 50 meters water resistant, which is a bit more than the standard dress watch, and you can see here a couple of different finishings, including satination of the wheels with beveling of the inner circumference and the spokes. You can see engine turning on the base plate and some of the bridges adjacent to the winding bridge at center, which features the only appearance of Côte de Genève. You'll also note that the bevels are nice and broad here as they are in the Arnold Son, not quite as broad as the Arnold, but still nicely mirrored. There are also black polished screws, and as you can see, a few components have been satinated for a high contrast look that absolutely slays. Now this is a heavy watch. There's a lot of mechanism inside this 42mm case, and being platinum, you really feel where the money went. This feels as expensive as it is, and that's a wonderful thing with a luxury watch, especially when you're talking about a brand that's such a buy pre-owned like Blancpain. You're actually getting a tremendous discount compared to the six-figure price of this watch when it was new back in the 2000s, and you're getting just as much high horology finish, engineering, and craft assembly as you would get in the likes of a Patek or a Lange, or for that matter, an FP Journe or a Laurent Ferrier. This is a very special timepiece, and with that fully integrated automatic double column wheel vertical clutch chronograph, it's technically as interesting as it is aesthetically. I always like to talk about value on this show, and for me, 90s Cartier represents outstanding value. This model, the Cartier Pasha C, is 35mm, and it exhibits a design that is often attributed to a model made in the 1930s for the Pasha of Marrakesh. I like to believe the story is true, but there's no direct evidence to suggest it actually happened. The design you see here is attributed in full to Gerald Genta back in 1985, as Cartier globally was scaling up following the unification of the three global Cartier branches. The arrival of the Pasha in the mid-80s was a huge shot in the arm for Cartier, and the arrival in 1995 of the Pasha C democratized that luxury in a way I can totally embrace. First of all, you can see that a designer penned this watch because the exact same font is used for the numerals and the date. It is a double-digit date on a glorious blue dial. Note the use of applique indices here, not printed features, lovely kite-style hands, and the famed canteen crown. As you remove the crown, and underneath is the crown that's actually used for winding and setting. Now it's an ETA 2896 internally, which means it's automatic winding with a double quick set for those double discs, and of course stop seconds. The case itself is water resistant down to 100 meters, and we'll pop open the clasp right here. It's water resistant down to 100 meters, which means this is a timepiece that you truly can use for swimming or in dusty conditions, which, as the legend relates, was the purpose of the original Cartier Pasha. It's a 35, but it wears larger than that thanks to the integrated hinge style lugs. You'll also appreciate that it's a well-made watch all around. A lifetime serviceable true luxury piece that opens up Cartier pleasures, and they are sybaritic pleasures, to a broad audience thanks to the fact that it's an affordable watch that wears well on a huge number of wrists. You'll also appreciate a feature that Patek Philippe no longer offers. You can see this bracelet with removable links fixed by screw, not pin sleeve, is built the way a luxury bracelet should be. All of satin finish, it's even fairly understated, beautifully executed, and an underrated modern-era Gerald Genta design. The Cartier Pasha and Pasha C are hidden gems in the marketplace, and probably the best buy on today's show. I described Blancpain as a low-volume, independent-like brand within a larger group, and the same goes for Glashutte Original. I'm not actually sure that Swatch knows it owns GO, and that might be a good thing because they do make watches, style watches, and innovate their own way in Saxony, and I'm not sure BN necessarily deserves any input into watches like this. This was a one-year model, the vintage 60s Panodate, 42mm in stainless steel, launched for 2018 and only made for 1 year with the Degrade green dial. You can see it's a multi-step process to create this, and we'll talk about some of those steps. First, there is a multi-ton stamping forge that creates the basic pattern. It's then alternately galvanized to add color and lacquered. In particular, the fade you see from the green at the center to the black at the edge is achieved by hand lacquering. Now you can see there's a lovely 60s inspired font for the quarter Arabics, but possibly the best feature of this dial is the fact that the indices themselves are mirrored and concave. They're actually cut into the dial and then polished. Now of course there is a double digit date here. We have, just as with the Pasha, we have a double date and a double quickset, automatic winding, 40-hour power reserve. Inside the case, you have a Glashutte Original factory made movement. It is a manufacturer caliber 39. As you can see, it's nicely executed. My favorite features are the Glashutte stripes, as well as the black polished swan's neck. You can also see that there's a bubble-like sapphire over both sides of this watch. It is definitely thin enough to wear with a sleeve, and you can see that bubble-like profile, giving it some of the evocative off-axis distortion of the actual 60s models, but with the scratch resistance of sapphire. Full deployment clasp, no cost cutting here. It's a good-looking watch, and it's a 42 that, because of the short and stubby lugs, wears a little bit like the Arnold Son. Not excessively broad across the wrist, quite handsome, dynamic, and very animated as the watch dial changes from almost black to almost Kelly green metallic at different angles. So this is a timepiece that gives you a lot of value, exclusivity, and a great brand to boot as part of the equation. A timepiece of extraordinary style and one of the best GO efforts of the last 10 years, truly. Okay, from this part of the show, the watches are going to get crazier and crazier. I'm building to a crescendo, and the watch we have right here is often described as the Resonance 3, 40mm. This is the black label Chronometre Resonance, as introduced in 2010, the asymmetrical dial in black label form. Black label is just for previous new watch buyers at FP Journe Boutique or Espace, and can only be purchased through FP Journe Boutique or Espace. So you must be an existing Journe owner and buy through an exclusive point of sale. The watch you see here, featuring the platinum case in 40mm and the black dial, exhibiting the distinctive traits of the Black Label series, which arrived in 2008, and they can only make 2 of any given model per year. So not only are there constraints on who can buy, but there are limits on how many can be made. You'll note this is the Resonance 3 dial, which is often described, by me at least, as the winking watch because of the asymmetry of the dials, one of which is scrolling hours and minutes and one of which is a 12-hour format. You have scrolling in 24-hour format, you have 12-hour format. Now you have the ability via the crown, it is a bullhead style crown, to set these dials independently, and that is executed by turning them in opposite directions. There's a 42-hour power reserve, there are 2 barrels, 2 separate power reserves, drivetrains, 2 separate regulators. There is no link between these 2 separate movements, but via the phenomenon of resonance, which FP Journe first started working on, I really should have wound the watch first, but we've got another one wound ready to go. FP Journe started working on resonance, a system pioneered with pendulum clocks by Antide Janvier. In 1983, the first Journe Resonance pocket watch did not work. But in 2000, he began to experiment with a wristwatch format resonance, and that was a success. Caliber 1499 in its second iteration here, or I should say its third rather, in rose gold with a modified barrel bridge compared to the earlier brass movements. You see the pivots, but you don't see the ratchet wheels. So you have barrel, drivetrain, escapement, and you have a balance. On each side, you can see there's a small rack and pinion with a rose gold pinion screw at center that you use to adjust the distance between these two balances. The emanations from the escapements and the balance in time, 7 to 10 minutes after activation, will synchronize these two. So if one speeds up, the other will slow it down, and vice versa. Now, of course, because they will not be in sync for 7 to 10 minutes, the seconds hand might be out of sync on each side. So there's a flyback function that allows you to synchronize the two of them. The watch does work as a true dual time, though that is not the basic premise of the watch. Resonance is, and that phenomenon in a wristwatch was an FP Journe world premiere. Now you can see this one was made early on in the Black Label series because it features the French-made Eleanor case with the maker's mark of Eleanor outside of Paris, as well as both French and Swiss hallmarks. Eleanor was discontinued and moved to Geneva by FP Journe in 2008, and that was also the first year for the Black Label, so the combination of that case with this series is very unusual. Let's take a look at the 40 on the wrist, and then we'll show a 38. It's a nice looking watch. This particular strap really brings out the best in it too. As you can see, the red details of the dial popping, complemented beautifully by the red strap, which I should also mention is an FP Journe factory piece and alligator leather on both sides. Okay, you're in luck. I did in fact wind this one, and as you can see, it is a gloriously synchronized piece. Now this is a 38mm resonance made in approximately 2008. You can always tell when you see the rose gold movement that it was made from mid-2004 or later, and you know because the watch features the Eleanor case that was made probably 2008 or earlier, so 2004 or later because of the movement, 2008 or earlier, and you know because there is no year of manufacture stamp on the case back that it was probably made from the second half of 2005 or later, because that is when they stopped stamping that case back year of manufacture for the case. Now the dial is rose gold, and in combination with the 38mm discontinued case, 38mm discontinued along with the Eleanor manufacturer, so this is a multiply discontinued watch with what is known as the Resonance 1 dial, as you have 12 and 12 symmetrical dials, and here we have a good example of the watch with resonance having taken purchase but the seconds hand not being synchronized. I used the flyback trigger down at 4 o'clock to synchronize them, and now everything runs in sync. Even though the dials are not set at the same time, the seconds hands are. 42-hour power reserve times 2. You could see that again, we have that later iteration. This is actually, if we get close, the second iteration of the 1499. It is made of 18 karat rose gold. So this watch with a rose gold dial, a platinum case, and a rose gold movement winds up being very hefty. If you're into vintage Journe, and vintage Journe is pretty much anything from the late 2000s back, depending on how multiply discontinued its features are. This is a great way to get in because this is the iconic dial. This is the first generation resonance case size of preference and dial of preference, combined with the rose gold dial, which adds a little bit of warmth to the front of this watch. This is all around a great way to get into rare, discontinued, and now qualified as vintage FP Journe. I'll throw it on my wrist. The 38 is my preference. If I were buying a Journe, it would be a 39mm CB or it'd be a 38mm Resonance. They are great pieces because not only is it a world premiere, Journe was the first to do this with a wristwatch, but it is a very functional dual time. If you're a traveler or you simply know those in far-flung locations, having a second time zone is a godsend. Okay, this is easily the craziest watch on the show today. This watch launched in 2015, 46mm in red gold, 60-piece limited edition, is the Louis Monet Memoris. Dedicated to the 10th anniversary of the re-establishment of the Louis Monet brand and the 200th anniversary of Louis Monet's alleged invention of the chronograph, this is a timepiece that offers an awful lot of visual fireworks and a high grade of manual finishing. Now you can see the dial is open. A few of the features that stand out are the use of a lacquered dial, abundant satin metallic finishing on the chronograph levers, as well as the outboard chaptering for reading the seconds and fractions of seconds, and then the dial side monopusher chronograph mechanism, which is fully integrated into the movement. So you can see the lateral clutch, you can see the column wheel, you can see the levers and the horns in steel, beautifully brushed on their tops, and you can see just how much of the surfacing has been black polished, that poly noir or specular finish, the highest standard of optical finish one can execute on a surface. In particular, you can see at the base of the dial, the flanking bridge of the time frame, the time-telling dial, is entirely black polished. The beveling is also impressive. When you look on the edge, the bevels aren't Arnold Son broad, but they are mirrored and they are good looking. Now, it is an instantaneous jumping minute register, so that's a feather in its cap. And though it's a 46, it's 51.2 millimeters lug to lug. Take a look at just how much detail there is here, as there is a synthetic zircon stone inserted and held in place with a chaton as the end pivot seat for the bars that retain the strap. This watch features both black polished lugs and vertical satin finished flanks. You can see that the case is highly modular with many individual screw fixed secondary components, all of which is to say that this is the antithesis of Mies van der Rohe. This is more as more. And frankly, if more is more, most is most, and that describes this watch. It is a wonderful piece of horological theater on your wrist, and for convenience, it is also automatic winding. There's a bimetallic rotor, a combination of steel and rose gold, for winding the 48-hour power reserve, and the watch does feature hacking seconds, which for some reason is rare in high horology calibers. So good on Louis Monet for that feature. You can also see there is an enormous amount of decoration on the reverse side of the case, and a wonderful feature is the little recess in the case flank on each side that allows the strap to be drilled very, very close to the center line of the watch. You can see just how far inboard the pivot points are, allowing this enormous watch to wear really well on a small wrist and allowing the strap to move straight down without impediment. Short lugs, plenty of strap range of motion, and it's 15.9 millimeters thick, which is neither thick nor thin for this type of watch. But if you subscribe to the notion that more is more and you're a Beauvais kind of guy, this is very much in a Beauvais mode. The paradigm set by this kind of brand is simply that more decoration, more engineering, more visible mechanism will always result in more satisfaction. And frankly, if you're of that mind, then Jean-Marie Schaller's company is probably the place you should look for your satisfaction. This is the 60-piece limited edition Louis Monet Memoris. Okay, now we're getting into like Hall of Fame. The 2011 GPHG Aiguille d'Or, the DB28 from de Bethune, a timepiece that is in every way out of this world. First of all, the bridge for the barrels alone looks like a Starfleet officer's crest. You have that on your spandex leotard as you walk around the Starship Enterprise, and you could see exactly what I mean. For good measure, there is a black polished steel cap on top of the barrel bridge. Patents? You better believe it. There's a patented method for creating this 360-degree, 122-year adjustment interval moon phase. Spherical, one side white palladium, one side blued steel. Patented, triple parachute shock protection. You can see the blued springs outboard of the full balance bridge, but you can also see that there is Inca block at center for the balance staff, so you have 1, 2, 3 degrees of shock protection for the balance. Note the balance wheel, one of over half a dozen patented balance wheels by de Bethune. It is a silicon wafer with a very minimal coefficient of thermal expansion, so it's basically immune to changes in temperature. It won't change the timing as you get cold or hot, but it also features a white gold rim, so all of the mass is located as far outboard as possible. You can also see that there is a dog leg kink to the hairspring that gives you the concentric beating of an overcoil without the shock susceptibility of an overcoil. And yes, shock protection, hairspring, and balance all patented. There's also a silicon escape wheel that reduces variation in timing between maintenance and improves performance between maintenance. So you have an unseen element there that improves your timekeeping over the long term. There's also a stub power reserve indicator hiding next to the second barrel, and the watch has a manual wind 6-day power reserve. The lugs Floating and spring-loaded, variable geometry, allowing the watch to fit superbly, and though it looks substantial, the watch is 42.7 millimeters, very wearable, and only 10.9 millimeters thick. There is a screw-down bullhead style crown, and when you turn the watch over, you can see there is a more intuitive power reserve indicator. There's a power reserve indicator on both sides of the watch. You'll note that the timepiece, the GPHG Grand Prize winner, remains as distinctive and impressive almost a decade on. I should also mention that the watch features all the elements of hand finishing that you would expect on something like a Patek, a Grubel Forsey, or a high-grade independent, as there is beautiful black polishing, blackened screws, satin finished wheels. You could see the little titanium spheres that are used as the hour track. You could see the fired blue hands at center. You could see that the entire grade 5 titanium case has been hand polished. Nothing about this watch disappoints, and this is from a company that only makes 150 watches a year. Remember, FP Journe in general is going to make no more than 900. This is extraordinary exclusivity when you consider they're making, I mean, for Pete's sakes, they're making 1/6 as many watches as FP Journe, possibly the best kept secret in horology, independent or otherwise. This is a brand on the rise, one to watch and one to wear. My personal favorite, I should mention. That said, the best group brands have plenty to recommend them, and a Lange & Sohne of Saxony is one of the best, independent or group. I count them co-equal to Patek Philippe and arguably superior in that they have no entry-level finish. Relative to Audemars Piguet, that's a huge feather in Lange's cap because AP does have an enormous number of mechanically finished movements, and Vacheron is still using a number of customer calibers, all of which means this watch right here is superior in most regards to 2/3 of the big three. Let's talk real quick about what makes this watch special. It's a badass three-hander. 40.5 millimeters in red gold. This is the Richard Lange Pour le Merite, a 2009 200-piece limited edition with a Grand Faux enamel dial. You can see vitreous fired enamel like a pocket watch, bottomless, glossy, gleaming, and immune to tarnish or oxidation over time. It features lovely quarter Arabics in shocks of red, and as you can see, blued hands. Now the watch features a stop works, so you can neither overwind it nor allow it to run down where it's not keeping good time. You notice the second I turned the crown, the watch started ticking, and that is because the stop works maintains just enough energy in the barrel to resume operation of the watch the second you wind it, even a quarter turn. Now the Pour le Merite in the nomenclature indicates the presence of a fusee and chain, and what happens is as you wind, the fusee takes a 20 centimeter long, 636 part, 1/4 of a millimeter thick chain, and it pulls it over to the fusee from the barrel. As the watch unwinds, the barrel pulls the fusee, which turns the drivetrain, but the fusee is like, it's basically a cone. It's like a stack of gears in a bicycle cassette, and as the barrel loses its mainspring wind, it exerts less force, so it turns a larger diameter of the fusee to increase its mechanical advantage and deliver constant force to the escapement for its full 36 hours of reserve de marche. Now you can see there's a planetary mechanism inside the fusee, so I can wind without reducing the force to the balance. It's a constant force mechanism derived from the pocket watch era, and there's a lot to love in the pocket watch paradigm right here, including a 3/4 style bridge, German silver or nickel copper zinc, with the copper giving these bridges and plates their golden hue, a freehand engraved balance cock, and you can see the structure adjacent holding the escape wheel is both freehand engraved and blessed with a black polished cover, black polished swan's neck, a rare use of an overcoil hairspring on a Lange watch, and as you can see, the click and the click spring dramatically specular, mirrored, and bright. Throw it on the wrist and take note, this watch includes a rare for Lange full deployant clasp. This is a monstrous three-hand watch with over 700 parts internally in a movement designed to deliver nothing so much as precision. This is a watch that satisfies the psyche even as it warms the heart. A timepiece that has everything going for it, front and back. But returning to the notion that sometimes more is more, we have the 2011 A Lange & Sohne Richard Lange Pour le Merite Tourbillon. Now we're upping the ante. The fusee and chain, back for the attack. And as you can see, as with the Richard Lange pour le Merite, it starts ticking the second I turn the crown. But there's more. 41.9 millimeters in diameter. The watch isn't as large as it seems. Note that as the hour hand approaches the gap left by the tourbillon aperture, a small semi-dial appears and disappears. And by the way, yes, that works in both directions, leaving the tourbillon visible and gloriously so. Now check this out. Hacking seconds on a tourbillon. You'll also note the tourbillon carriage is a wire style or filigree and entirely black polished. The case back of the watch is spectacular. You have that same 20 centimeter, 1/4 millimeter wide chain in the fusee system, which is so strong that it can suspend 2 kilograms. Also note on the underside of the tourbillon carriage, a diamond, not a synthetic, a real diamond, has been used as the lower capstone for the tourbillon architecture. You'll also note that the fusee and the chain are actually more visible on this model than on the standard Richard Lange pour le Merite. This watch exhausts superlatives. Heck, even the dial is made of sterling silver. There's also a deployment clasp on this watch, and it's true, independents are hot right now, but if you want the ultimate brand, I still feel that from top to bottom, you really can't do a whole lot better than Lange's collection. Maybe de Bethune hits higher highs, but top to bottom, I can't think of a brand that offers as much integrity in its grandest complication and its basic entry-level Saxonia thin. And this watch is certainly closer to the top of the tech tree than the bottom, so you're getting all of that and complication. Possibly the place where my heart rests and my next collection theme, a Lange und Sohne. Remember guys, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com to buy anything you see here, or if you're looking to trade up, swap, or simply sell me your watch or full collection, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.